There are moments in life when an entire nation holds its breath, when the fate of millions rests not on bullets or borders, but on numbers flickering across screens in boardrooms thousands of miles away. For Amira Khalid al-Mansouri, a widowed mother of 3 in the dust-choked streets of Baghdad's Karada district, the Iraqi dinar had become more than currency. It had become the last thread connecting her to a future she could barely imagine, a lifeline she clutched with hands that had forgotten what it meant to rest. The sun hadn't yet broken over the Tigris River on that October morning when Amira's phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. Her hands trembled as she read the words, blurred by tears that came before understanding. CBI emergency announcement, official dinar revaluation pending. For 7 years, she had heard rumors, followed forums, believed and doubted in equal measure. 7 years of checking exchange rates like a woman possessed, of hiding crumpled bills in coffee tins and beneath floorboards, of whispering to her children that someday, somehow, their suffering would end. 7 years of being called foolish, desperate, delusional by neighbors who had given up on miracles. But Amira had learned long ago that hope was not a luxury, it was survival. Before we continue with Amira's journey, I want to ask you something from the heart. If you believe in the power of hope, in second chances, in the resilience of the human spirit, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, whether you're in Baghdad or Boston, Basra or Berlin, we're all connected by the dreams we carry. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more stories of courage and transformation to people who need them most. Now, let's return to Amira's story. The apartment where Amira raised her 3 children was a monument to loss. Every crack in the plaster told a story: the explosion 3 blocks away in 2014 that had shattered their windows, the water damage from the winter when they couldn't afford repairs, the scorch marks near the kitchen where her youngest, 9-year-old Laith, had tried to cook eggs while she worked her second shift at the textile factory. The furniture was a patchwork of survival: chairs with mismatched legs, a table held together by wire and prayer, mattresses thin as paper where her children, Laith, 14-year-old Zara, and 17-year-old Omar, slept in a tangled heap each night because there wasn't room for anything else. Amira's husband, Khalid, had been an engineer before the war, a man who spoke 3 languages and dreamed of building bridges that would connect Iraq to a brighter future. He had died on a Tuesday, crushed beneath rubble when a mortar shell hit the construction site where he'd taken a laborer's job because engineering work had dried up like the marshes in the south. Amira remembered the color of the sky that day, pale gray, like dishwater, and the way the hospital hallway had smelled of disinfectant and defeat. She remembered signing papers she couldn't read through her tears, and the hollow sound her children's crying made in the empty apartment when she told them their father was never coming home. After Khalid's death, Amira had done what millions of Iraqi women had done before her. She became both mother and father, provider and protector, dreamer and pragmatist. She worked 14-hour days at the textile factory, her fingers bleeding from the machines, her back screaming from standing on concrete floors. She took in sewing at night, squinting by candlelight when the power went out, which was often. She sold her wedding jewelry piece by piece, watching her past disappear into the hands of pawnbrokers who knew desperation when they saw it. But it was Omar who had first heard about the dinar revaluation. Her eldest son, wise beyond his years with eyes that had seen too much, had come home from the market one evening 3 years after his father's death with a crumpled newspaper article. "Mama," he had said, his voice careful, "some people are saying the dinar might become valuable again. Like before the wars, like when Baba was young." Amira had laughed, a bitter, exhausted sound. "Habibi, people say many things. They said peace would come. They said the electricity would be fixed. They said our lives would get better." But Omar had persisted, showing her forums online at the internet cafe, translations of economic reports, whispers from financial experts in Dubai and London. The Central Bank of Iraq, they said, was under pressure to revalue the currency. Iraq's oil reserves were massive. The country was rebuilding. International investors were circling. The dinar, which had been decimated by sanctions and wars, trading at nearly 1,500 to a single US dollar, could theoretically be revalued to its former strength. Some optimists claimed it could even surpass its pre-war value. "People are investing, Mama," Omar had said, his young face alight with something Amira hadn't seen since Khalid died: hope. "They're buying dinar now, waiting for the RV, the revaluation. When it happens, if it happens, people could." "Could what?" Amira had asked, afraid to let herself imagine, could change their lives. Omar had finished quietly. That night, Amira had lain awake on her thin mattress, listening to her children breathe in the darkness. She thought about Zara, who deserved to finish school instead of staying home to care for Laith when Amira worked. She thought about Omar, brilliant and hungry for education, who had stopped attending university because they couldn't afford the fees. She thought about Laith, who wheezed with asthma and needed medicine they could barely afford, who had never known a life without struggle. The next day, Amira had taken money she'd been saving for winter blankets, 250,000 Iraqi dinar, about $170 at the time, and instead of spending it, she kept it. She hid it in a coffee tin beneath the loose floorboard in the kitchen. Over the following months, every spare note she earned went into that tin. She stopped buying sugar for tea. She mended clothes until they were more patched than original fabric. She walked an extra mile to save bus fare. And slowly, painfully, her hidden savings grew. Other workers at the factory thought she was crazy when they found out. "The dinar will never be worth anything," said Fatima, a grandmother who had worked the machines for 30 years. "We'll die poor, just like we were born." "You're being foolish," said Hassan, the floor supervisor, shaking his head. "Spending money you should use to feed your children on this fantasy." But Amira noticed that even as they criticized her, some of them started doing the same thing. Holding back bills, checking their phones for news from the CBI, whispering about what they would do, if, and, when, and, maybe. The years that followed were a masterclass in endurance. Amira watched her children grow in shoes that pinched and clothes that didn't fit. She celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes made from the cheapest flour, singing louder to drown out the emptiness. She held Laith through asthma attacks that terrified her, praying to Allah with a fervor that left her hoarse. She watched Omar's dreams of becoming a doctor fade a little more each day he spent fixing motorcycles instead of reading medical textbooks. She saw the light dim in Zara's eyes as the girl understood, with heartbreaking clarity, that her future would likely mirror her mother's past. But through it all, Amira kept saving. She followed the news obsessively. The Central Bank of Iraq made announcements, then retracted them. International monetary funds issued reports that seemed promising, then concerning. Currency exchange websites showed the dinar fluctuating, but never dramatically. There were rumors every few months. "It's happening next week, the announcement is coming, my cousin's friend works at the CBI and says," and each time, Amira's heart would race, only to settle back into disappointed rhythm when nothing changed. Still, she noticed small signs that Iraq was evolving. New buildings rising from rubble. Roads being repaired. Foreign companies investing in oil fields. The country was still wounded, still struggling, but it was breathing. And where there was breath, Amira reasoned, there could be life. Omar, now 20, had become her partner in this vigil. He spent hours at the internet cafe, translating economic reports, watching YouTube videos from self-proclaimed currency experts, joining forums where thousands of people from around the world discussed the Iraqi Dinar RV like it was the second coming. Some of these foreign investors had purchased millions in dinar, betting their savings on Iraq's recovery. Others were skeptics, calling it a scam, a delusion, a trap for the desperate. "Mama, look at this," Omar would say, showing her his phone screen with articles about Vietnam's dong revaluation, or Kuwait's currency recovery after the Gulf War. "It's possible. It's happened before. Inshallah," Amira would whisper. God willing. By the autumn of 2023, Amira had accumulated nearly 8 million dinar, a sum that sounded enormous but was only worth about $5,400 at the current rate. It was more money than she'd ever had at once, but it wasn't enough to change anything yet. Not enough to buy a better apartment. Not enough to send Omar to medical school. Not enough to ensure Zara and Laith would have futures beyond survival. Unless it was. The night before that October morning, Amira had a dream. In it, Khalid stood in their old apartment, the one from before the war, with its sturdy furniture and windows that looked out onto gardens instead of rubble. He was wearing his engineer's clothes, clean and pressed, and he was smiling. "Take care of our children," he said, like he always did in her dreams. But this time he added something new. "Your patience is about to be rewarded, my love. Hold on just a little longer." She had woken with tears on her face and an ache in her chest that felt like both grief and anticipation. She'd checked her phone, a habit so ingrained she did it before her eyes fully opened, and seen the message that had stopped her heart. The CBI announcement was scheduled for noon. All Amira had to do was wait 6 more hours. Those 6 hours stretched like years. She couldn't eat the bread Zara had prepared for breakfast. She couldn't focus on the sewing she'd brought home from the factory. She paced the small apartment like a caged animal, her phone clutched in her hand, refreshing news sites until her fingers cramped. "Mama, you're scaring me," Zara said, watching her mother with worried eyes that were too knowing, too old. "I'm fine, Habibti," Amira lied. "Just waiting for news." Omar sat beside her, his own phone in hand, translating updates from English and Arabic sources. The international news was picking up the story. Bloomberg had published an article. Reuters had correspondents at the central bank building in Baghdad. Currency forums were exploding with speculation. Some people claimed they had inside information. Others warned it was a false alarm, another disappointment in a long line of letdowns. "Whatever happens," Omar said quietly, "we'll be okay, Mama. We've survived worse." Amira looked at her son, this young man who had lost his childhood to poverty and grief but somehow remained kind, hopeful, determined, and felt her heart could break and soar simultaneously. "Yes," she whispered, "we have." At 11:45 a.m., the apartment was silent except for the traffic noise filtering through the windows and the rapid beating of Amira's heart. Zara had stopped pretending to do homework. Laith sat on the floor, sensing something important was happening even if he didn't understand what. The four of them huddled around Omar's phone, watching a live stream of the CBI building where reporters gathered like pilgrims at a shrine. At precisely noon, the governor of the Central Bank of Iraq, Drive, Ali Mohsen al-Alak, stepped to a podium flanked by Iraqi flags and began to speak. Amira didn't understand all the economic terminology, the references to monetary policy and international agreements and fiscal reform. But she understood the numbers. She understood when Dr. al-Alak announced that after extensive negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, after years of economic restructuring and oil revenue stabilization, the Central Bank of Iraq was officially revaluing the Iraqi dinar. The new rate, effective immediately, would be approximately 1 Iraqi dinar to 1 United States dollar and 30 cents. The room spun. Amira gripped Omar's arm so hard she would later see the bruises. Zara was crying. Laith was asking what it meant, his voice small and confused. And Omar, brilliant, patient Omar, was calculating on his phone with shaking hands. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking. "Mama, if the rate is really 1.30 to 1, you're 8 million dinar." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. 8 million dinar at $1.30 per dinar equaled over 10 million US dollars. Amira al-Mansouri, widow, factory worker, mother of 3, who had sewn her fingers bloody and walked miles in worn shoes and hidden money in coffee tins while her neighbors called her foolish, Amira was a millionaire. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept over her like sunrise, slow and then all-consuming. She stood up, sat down, stood up again. She walked to the kitchen and stared at the floorboard that hid her fortune. She walked back to the living room where her children sat in stunned silence. She looked at Omar's phone, where the CBI announcement was being replayed, where financial experts were already discussing the implications, where the exchange rate was being confirmed by bank after bank after bank. It was real. "Mama," Zara whispered, "what does this mean?" Amira knelt before her children, gathered them close, and for the first time in 7 years, she let herself cry not from grief or exhaustion or fear, but from relief so profound it felt like dying and being reborn. "It means," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion, "it means everything changes. It means Omar goes to medical school. It means Zara can study anything she wants. It means Laith gets the medicine he needs, the doctors, the life he deserves. It means we get to live instead of just survive." "Will we move?" Laith asked, looking around their shabby apartment. Amira laughed through her tears. "Yes, Habibi, we'll move. We'll find a place with your own room, with windows that close properly, with heat in the winter and air in the summer." "Will we have enough to help others?" Omar asked, because of course he would think of that. "The neighbors, people at the factory." "Yes," Amira said firmly. "Yes, we will help. We'll remember what it felt like to struggle, and we'll make sure others don't have to suffer the same way." The days that followed were surreal. Amira went to the bank with her hidden fortune, her hands trembling as she presented millions in dinar to tellers whose eyes widened in shock. The conversion process took hours, verification, documentation, security checks. But when it was done, when the numbers appeared in her account, When she held the confirmation papers in her hands, Amira sat in the bank lobby and wept. News of the revaluation spread across Iraq like wildfire. The streets erupted in celebration and chaos. People who had saved dinar, workers like Amira, small business owners, families who had squirreled away bills in mattresses and walls, suddenly found themselves with wealth they'd never imagined. The currency exchange offices were mobbed. Banks extended hours. The government declared a national holiday. But there was complexity too. The sudden influx of wealth created inflation overnight. Prices skyrocketed as demand surged. The wealthy who had always been wealthy resented this shift in economic power. Scammers and thieves emerged, targeting the newly rich who didn't know how to protect their assets. The government scrambled to implement controls, to manage the chaos, to ensure the revaluation didn't destabilize the entire economy. Amira, guided by Omar's research and a financial advisor they hired immediately, was careful. She didn't spend wildly or flash her wealth. She paid off debts first, years of accumulated bills to shopkeepers who had extended credit, to the landlord who had been patient when rent was late, to the pharmacist who had given them medicine on good faith. She gave generous gifts to Fatima from the factory, to Hassan the supervisor, to neighbors who had shared food when they had nothing. Then she bought a house. Not a palace, but a real home in a safe neighborhood with a garden where Laith could play without fear. It had 3 bedrooms, one for each child, a luxury that made them all cry, and a kitchen with modern appliances and a living room large enough for them to sit together without touching. The windows had glass that didn't rattle in the wind. The walls were thick and sound. There was electricity that worked and water that ran hot. The day they moved in, Amira walked through each room alone, touching the walls, testing the light switches, standing in doorways and marveling at the space. In the master bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, a real bed with a proper mattress, and imagined Khalid beside her. "We did it, my love," she whispered to the empty air. "Our children are safe now. They have a future." Omar enrolled in medical school the following semester. On his first day, wearing new clothes and carrying new books in a new backpack, he hugged his mother goodbye with tears streaming down his face. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't believed," he told her. "If you hadn't saved, hadn't hoped, hadn't held on." "We held on together," Amira corrected him. "We survived together. And now we'll build a better life together." Zara flourished in private school, her natural intelligence finally given room to grow. She joined clubs, made friends, discovered a passion for literature and writing. She began to smile again, real smiles that reached her eyes, not the careful half-expressions of a girl trying to make her mother feel better. Laith, with access to specialists and proper medication, stopped wheezing through the nights. His asthma became manageable. He grew strong and loud and joyfully chaotic, making up for years of being too sick to play. He joined a football team and brought home muddy jerseys and scraped knees and stories of goals scored and games won. But Amira didn't forget where she came from. She returned to the textile factory not as a worker but as an investor, buying a stake in the company and immediately implementing better conditions, shorter hours, higher wages, safety equipment, healthcare benefits. When the owner protested, Amira smiled and reminded him that workers with dignity were workers with loyalty and productivity. She established a foundation to help widows and single mothers, providing microloans and business training, childcare assistance and education scholarships. She funded repairs at local schools and clinics. She sponsored orphans and built playgrounds in neighborhoods that had known only dust and rubble. People who had called her foolish came to her with gratitude and apologies. Amira welcomed them with grace, never once saying, "I told you so," because she remembered the doubt she'd felt too, the nights she'd wondered if she was throwing away money her children needed on an impossible dream. It was never impossible, she would tell them. It was just improbable. But improbable things happen every day. The whole history of Iraq is improbable: ancient civilization and modern devastation, wars and survival, loss and resilience. We are an improbable people. Hope is our birth.